evening, and welcome to our fourth lecture, right? Called Weaponization of the Black Masculine Body. My name is Lakita Barnett Bailey. I am an associate professor in the Department of Africana Studies at Georgia State University. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing the chair of the Department of African American Studies, Dr. Jonathan Gayles, to give us a lecture on the Black masculine body. But before I introduce Dr. Gayles, I want to make sure that we are reminded of the purpose and of the series in general. The Freedom School series is a series that is trying to emphasize again this tradition of freedom schools, so to provide political and we are doing this as an way in order to build relationships with the larger Atlanta community, as well as to provide information and scholarship from those around campus and around the nation. Again, we started the series this year. We will be continuing the series in the fall, in the spring semester, where we will have more lecture series than we had this year. But we want to thank the Department of African American Studies and the Auburn Avenue Research Library for hosting and working with us to make sure that we promote and are able to have this webinar series for our larger Atlanta community. So again, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Jonathan Gayles. Dr. Jonathan Gayles is a professor and the chair of Africana Studies at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. He is a graduate of Morehouse College with a BA in psychology, Winthrop University with the MS in school psychology, and the University of South Florida with a Ph.D. in applied anthropology. His primary areas of interest include the anthropology of education, educational policy, Black masculinity, and critical media studies. He is currently investigating the contested Blackness of the Black Christ of Portobello, Panama. Most recently, he has produced 2 documentary films, White Scripts and Black Superman, Black Masculinities and Comic Books, with the California Newsreel, and the E-Word, Ebonics, Race, and Language Politics with Films Media Group. So please welcome Dr. Gayles.
Thank you, Lakita. I want to thank you for all of your hard work, you and Dr. Akanyele Omoju, for really bringing the Freedom Schools to life. I'm honored to have an opportunity to share some thoughts with everyone. And I'm honored also because there have been some phenomenal lecturers in relation to this school, or participants in the Freedom School this semester. And we have great plans for the spring as well. And I want to second your expression of gratitude to Auburn Avenue Research Library, a phenomenal community partner for us. And so I'm going to jump right in here and take a breath and try to make sure that I share my screen here and get started. All right, 1 second. Here we go. All right. I'm hoping that you can see my screen, Lakita.
Yes.
All right. Okay, great. That's me. Well, not me, but this image represents how I felt reading comic books growing up. I felt that I was dreaming someone else's dreams, imagining through the imaginations of others. Both of my parents reared my sister and me, Monica, my sister and me, to consume media critically. And although I loved comic books because of the escape that comic books provided, eventually the general dearth of African-American superheroes required too much imaginative labor from me. I grew tired of ignoring the absence of representation, and as I entered my adolescence, I discarded my comic books. Now, this is me with my father, Joseph. Who knows what I was thinking at the time? It's a fairly vacant look on my face. My colleagues probably recognize that vacant look. Perhaps I was delivering my father a present in my diaper, or perhaps I was imagining that I could fly. Comic books provided me with this kind of escape, but the reality of my status as a Black male brought me back to earth time and time again. And so while comic books eventually came for me to represent the weight of race and the politics of representation or lack thereof. And so again, I distanced myself from comic books and the white imaginings of others. But I want to talk about the love that I had for comic books, at least initially, before I was, again, brought back to earth, as it were. At the center of this love and the beginning of my own critical engagement of Black masculinity is Luke Cage. Now, not this Luke Cage, this Luke Cage. My man, Luke Cage. Lucas Cage. I was living in Talladega, Alabama at the time and attending what was essentially an all-white private school in Anniston, Alabama. And those of you that are historians know that Anniston is fairly infamous. So I was attending this all-white private school, and I discovered Luke Cage at my local corner store on the comic book rack, and I was transfixed. Luke Cage became my hero, not Thor, not Captain America, not Spider-Man, Luke Cage. And I'm a Marvel guy, and for good reason. I saw in Luke Cage myself, but only in a kind of race and gendered shorthand. He was a Black male, and I was as well, although young. This was empowering for me, seeing myself in this hero. And so while it was difficult to get my hands on issues of Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, regularly, he was my first Black superhero. Now, I mentioned Luke Cage here, later known as Power Man, because in many ways, he represents the genesis of my affection for comic books and my re-entry to the genre as an academic. And perhaps a decade ago, I was in Little 5 Points, and I saw a copy of what's called the trade paperback. And it collects, as you see here, multiple issues in one book. And I saw Luke Cage, and I remember thinking, oh, this is great. I'm going to read this. I'm going to reminisce. It's going to bring back all these fond memories of this character. And about a week or so later, I started reading the trade paperback. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table and saying out loud, this bleep is racist. I couldn't believe it. This character that I loved so much, this character for whom I had so much affection, when I saw how he was represented, the way in which Black men were represented, the way in which the Black community was represented, it was clearly racist. I was stunned by what I saw, even hurt. And if I'm honest, and between us, I was also more than a little embarrassed, perhaps even ashamed. Ashamed of myself because I should have known better. Even as a young person, because of the investment my parents made in my own critical consumption of media, I should have known better. So as a point of reference, here's a clip that considers some of Luke Cage's enemies. So I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna go here, and here.
And I could still, there was Cottonmouth, there was Cockroach, and Big Ben Donovan with the stack shoes. Now as an adult who's been out in the world, I can look at that and see, not look at this thing for my children, but I say, is that the best that can be offered up for the audience that they say we're trying to attract?
Okay. So, as an adult and as an academic, seeing that representation of Luke Cage and understanding a few things. That girls, I'm sorry. Grace, come get your iPad, please. It's just real Corona life. I had to think about all of this and what all of that meant. And what I came to realize is that Luke Cage was a hero for hire. What does it mean to be a hero for hire? What does it mean for a superhero to say, I mean, I'm even better when someone's paying me? What does it mean for a hero to say, oh, $2,000, you bought yourself a superhero? You know, while other superheroes were fighting for the sake of the universe, Luke Cage was worrying about how he was going to pay rent. He was bound to Harlem. Harlem was represented in the most stereotypical ways: exotic urban wasteland, the grabbers, the slow-eyed boys looking for the fast money, the night walkers, for the world, into the worlds of people who call New York an animal and live off it like tapeworms. This was the Luke Cage I loved growing up. I read all of this. I all of this growing up. Despite my parents' incessant efforts to teach us to consume media critically, I missed all of this. And it was not until I returned to this material as an adult that I recognized how offensive it was. I mean, my parents worked hard and I still missed it. My father rooted for Apollo in Rocky 1 and 3. Now, some of you are old enough to understand what that means. My father rooted for Apollo, not Rocky. So I love Luke Cage, and I have no doubt that I missed all of the problems with the character because of my own Black masculine blindness, and to be more specific in today's terms, my own Black cishet blindness. There were things that I simply could not see because I was so invested in a certain understanding of myself and what Luke Cage represented, the kind of power that he represented for me in that space. And so I wanted and needed representation in the superhero domain so badly that I ignored, well, everything. And this is true of the Falcon as well. Not this Falcon, Captain America's partner. And I'm going to let my friend and colleague Julian Chambliss from Michigan State give us a sense of the Falcon's problems.
I think that the sidekick role, like he's not the first character who's Black, although he's the first African American. And I often like make this distinction. Like I was just writing something relating to the Black Panther animated series. I make the point there, like, you know, Black Panther is the first Black character, but he's not the first American who is Black in comic book. It's the Falcon. African American is the Falcon. He is the character that represents an American superhero. And who is he paired with and who is he associated with? Well, he's associated with Captain America, the most patriotic and most well-respected hero in the Marvel Universe. And remember that the Falcon's original origin was, you know, he was a fine, upstanding kid who came across these villagers that were being exploited by these terrorists, and he helps them. And Steve Rogers recognized this. And in the late 1970s, you find out that all that's a lie. In fact, the Falcon is actually a pawn of the Red Skull, the number one enemy of Captain America. Now, I always feel like at some point, somebody somewhere might have said to these people, to the writers, look, you know, do you think it might be problematic to make the origin of the first African-American superhero a crazed Nazi white supremacist? But no, you know, the retcon happens, and suddenly you find out that all the things that you knew about the Falcon are not true. No longer is Sam Wilson a fine, upstanding, middle-class guy. In fact, his family died, and he had a life crime. And he actually was on that island because he was on a drug run, and his plane crashed, and the Red Skull found him and decided he's going to use him as a weapon against Captain America and create a persona of a fine, upstanding young man that Captain America would want as a partner, all because he plans on later triggering him as a sleeper agent against Captain America. And indeed, that is the story. And of course, as is always the way in superhero comics, he's able to fight off the programming and overcome it. And once again, Captain America and the Falcon come together as a duo and fight and defeat the Red Skull. And Sam Wilson, the Falcon, owns up to his crime. And as far as I know, the only person in Marvel Universe ever to have as his parole officer, Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D., is the Falcon's parole officer.
Okay. So, I love the Falcon growing up. And thinking about the ways in which, retrospectively as an academic, thinking about the ways in which Black men were represented in comic books, it stunned me, because we have to understand comic books represent a space where you can imagine anything. And yet, as related to the first African-American superheroes, these heroes were bound to old stereotypes about Black men. And these patterns continue. Why does Black Lightning live in a place called Suicide Slum? Why his uniform, his outfit, his superhero outfit is to put on an Afro wig and a white mask and use street slang? Why is John Stewart, the Green Lantern John Stewart, represented as an angry Black man? Tyrock, why is Tyrock a superhero that he wears leotards and whatnot? And why is his power essentially to yell at people? And so this really grounded my documentary, White Scripts and Black Supermen. And as I thought about the fact that Black men were bound to these stereotypes, even in this imagined space, racism was an insufficient answer to explain this for me. Clearly, racism and white supremacy were indeed involved in these portrayals, but I wanted to consider the specific manner in which racism operated in the imagined, fantastic, limitless, allegedly, space of comic books. And this question in my desire is again, what is at the center of the documentary. And there's a long-standing body of research on these patterns of representation, and I was not aware of this research. And one particularly powerful source for me is Jeffrey Brown's brilliant book on Milestone Comics. And Jeffrey Brown tells us, if we think about the fact that the Black masculine body is already historical, well, I'll just tell you what he says. If the Black male body is already culturally ascribed as a site of hypermasculinity, then the combination of the two, a Black male superhero, runs the risk of being read as an overabundance, a potentially threatening cluster of masculine signifiers. A potentially threatening cluster of masculine signifiers. So if we think about this just within the superhero domain in this imagined space, think about these early images of Black superheroes. We saw the image of Tyrock being bound. Look at his uniform, the chains there. Look at some of the early images of Luke Cage as Black Buck, as a threatening cluster of masculine signifiers. A possible visual representation of the response to this threat is seen in these images in the way in which Luke Cage is bound. In ways that are disturbingly reminiscent. A potentially threatening cluster of masculine signifiers. So this is how we imagine Black men in a space in which we can imagine anything. While it is an imagined threat, it has very real consequences. I would argue that there is nothing potential about this threat the Black masculine body represents. I mean, it is imagined, but again, it has very real consequences. And for the record, terrorism in this country preceded the tragedies of Oklahoma City and 9/11. This is Will Brown. Now, I don't traffic in Black trauma porn. So I'm not going to leave this image up. But Will Brown, tortured, mutilated, burned in Omaha in 1919. In our struggles with the profound cruelty and inhumanity that this image conveys, and the grotesque pleasure that is apparent in the white faces in the mob standing in the smoke of Brown's burning body and burning flesh, we must work our way beyond racism as the explanation. It's too easy. The ritualistic and ceremonial destruction of Black male bodies is much more than simple racism. It is a response to the power ascribed to the Black masculine body. As evidence of this, we need only consider the fact that pieces of lynched men were collected: toes, charred fingers, ears, livers, hearts, and certainly genitalia. Sometimes before the victim had expired, carried home as curios, keepsakes, mementos, placed on bookshelves and tabletops as conversation pieces. This is more than simple racism. There's a certain intimacy involved in such cruelty. The desire to touch, to feel, to possess the body. This is much more than racism. And I believe that understanding the Black masculine body as a white fetish is a useful device for us here. Consider Anne McClintock's assertion that by displacing power onto the fetish, then manipulating the fetish, the individual gains symbolic control over what might otherwise be terrifying ambiguities. Terrifying ambiguities. As Frantz Fanon tells us, the Tarzan stories, the sagas of 12-year-old explorers, the adventures of Mickey Mouse, and all those comic books serve actually as a release for collective aggression. The magazines are put together by white men for little white men. Now, to be fair, in the comic book genre, this is changing somewhat. And we have writers like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Roxane Gay and others that are expanding the narrative and creating more whole and humane images of Black people. But certainly this kind of pattern, this intersection of white imaginings persists. But as it relates to the earliest Black superheroes, this is certainly the case, these old ideas. And in his work on the representation of Asian masculinity, Richard Ng refers to the white cultural imaginary. This too is a useful device to help us understand what it is that we are discussing and considering this evening. The white cultural imaginary, a noun, a thing, an imagined Black masculinity that must be mitigated, resolved, destroyed, consumed, controlled, made safe, lest it disrupt the hierarchy upon which white patriarchy is constructed and maintained. It is a strange thing to be imagined by others. It is a dangerous thing to be imagined by others. James Brown describes his experience in this way: I think I know something about the American masculinity that which most men of my generation do not know, because they have not been menaced by it the way that I have been. It is still true, alas, that to be an American Negro male is also to be a kind of walking phallic symbol, which means that one pays in one's own personality for the sexual insecurity of others. The idolatry and fetishizing of the Black masculine body has a long tradition in American visual culture. Among the most famous and infamous in this tradition is photographer Robert Mapplethorpe and his Black Book. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'll spend some time on it. The image that we're going to discuss this evening briefly recently sold for almost $500,000. So while many offer substantive critiques of Mapplethorpe's photography of Black men, consider Patricia Morisot's explanation of Mapplethorpe's allegedly racist photography of Black men and Milton Moore in particular. Now, this is an image called Man in a Polyester Suit. I have edited the image, I've cropped it so that we can't see what is below this area here, which is an open zipper, and out of which extends a certain piece of the body. That piece of the body is prominently figured in the image, and we do not see Milton Moore's face. Now, it is true that Milton Moore did not want to be identified, but there was a certain power in if we understand that the title of the image is The Man in the Polyester Suit. This is Milton Moore. Milton Moore. All right, so when we think about this idea of worshiping the Black masculine body, but then this idea of portraying it in a way that is less than human, in defending Robert Mapplethorpe, the argument was, well, not the argument, the statement is that Robert did not hate Black people at all. He loved, even worshiped Black men. Loved, even worshiped Black men. And yet, Milton Moore, in his own experience of Robert Mapplethorpe, says that I think he saw me like a monkey in a zoo. Worship to being seen like a monkey in a zoo. All right, so if this idea of worshiping Black men, if it referenced Black male bodies, Robert Mapplethorpe worshiped Black male bodies, and there's also and certainly a number of accounts of Robert Mapplethorpe using the N-word to describe Black men, and Milton Moore in particular. So if the reference were to Black male bodies instead of Black men, there would be no contradiction to be found in a white man worshiping Black male N-words in the late 80s. The Black masculine body has long been commodified and lauded as a source of value, strength, and even beauty. The same cannot be said for Black men themselves. Consider again Milton Moore's assessment of Mapplethorpe. I think he saw me like a monkey in a zoo. This is an apt analogy. Zoos represent a stage upon which animals are placed for viewing by the audience. The bars and pens that cage animals protect the audience, but also constrain the animals to a prescribed space so that they are more easily viewed, controlled, and consumed. So part of what I'm suggesting here is a relationship between the cultural ascription of power to the Black masculine body and the need to mitigate that power, address the fear that this power invokes, and the manner in which this need manifested itself in the representation of the first Black superheroes, and of course, more expansively in the representation of Black men more broadly. So here's something to consider: giant Negroes. And so what about giant Negroes? And by giant Negroes, I don't mean Black Goliath, who was one of the earlier Black superheroes. Black Goliath, Dr. William Foster, a child of the ghetto who pulled himself out of the Los Angeles slums, et cetera, and et cetera, and et cetera. Black Goliath, by the way, who was the first superhero to be killed in Marvel's crossover series, Civil War I. He was killed by a Thor clone. And just for dinner table conversation, in Civil War II, the first hero to die, Bill Foster buried in a tarp like a dog. In Civil War II, the first hero to die in the conflict between superheroes was also a Black man, and that was James Rhodes. Just dinner table conversation. Anyway, following the lead of blogger, Undercover Black Man, and it's his timely post entitled Attack of the Giant Negroes, I searched the New York Times from 1900 to 1959 and found 135 references to giant Negroes. As he writes, tongue-in-cheek, gather around, dear readers, you will find a time when giant Negroes roamed the earth. And here are a few examples. Giant Negro disables 4 policemen in a fight. He was a giant. He was 6'3", 220. Black Phantom caught in the Bronx. And giant Negro is not in the title, but it's in the body of the article. Again, the most recent reference is 1959 to a giant Negro. So these ideas of Black men as especially or perhaps inherently threatening are old, but not it's extinct. The first man to appear on Vogue was Richard Gere. And then it was George Clooney, and then LeBron James. The first Black man to appear on Vogue. The images are just a little different, you could argue. Central to what I argue this evening is that the meaning of this portrait, if you will, as noun, the meaning of this portraiture, if you will, as verb, is influenced by the inherent meaning contained within James' masculine body, especially when posed in conjunction with the white female body, Giselle. Why must LeBron rage so, mouth agape, yelling, muscles flexed, as if prepared to pounce, to be unleashed? This represents a stark contrast to Giselle's body, relaxed, composed, controlled. Our attention is called to LeBron's body as the meaning of the image is inscribed upon his body. His body bears the burden of communicating the power of the image, quite literally so, bearing the burden as prop, as pedestal, a structure upon which to rest. Bearing haunting similarities to previous images and previous propaganda in the United States. Well, Kanye was on Vogue too, and we're not going to do a lot on Kanye today. All right, so I have often wondered about the fascination with diminutive Black men on television while growing up during the height of the culture wars and public tensions around affirmative action and Black aspirations in post-civil rights United States. I've always wondered why there were these hit shows during that time, well, I know now why, that featured tiny Black men. But that's a discussion for another day. So, but while we are here, it might be an interesting intellectual exercise to reverse the opening image, and instead of the small Black boy gazing at the white hero longingly, it is the white hero gazing and imagining Black men as boys, smaller, weaker, safer, while imagining themselves as powerful. Dinner table conversation for you. But this imaginary, this white cultural imaginary, has very real consequences. Old ideas, but not extinct ideas. And if we didn't know this, the summer of 2020 has taught those of us that somehow didn't know that this is the case. Tragically, there are abundant examples of these consequences, but perhaps Darren Wilson's description of his encounter with Michael Brown is the most perfect example. Darren Wilson, in his deadly encounter with Michael Brown, described it as being similar to a 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. A 5-year-old holding on to Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan at his, as he was at, performing at his, at his height, was 6'7" and 300 pounds. The average 5-year-old boy is less than 4 feet tall and less than 40 pounds. Darren Wilson is not less than 4 feet tall and 40 pounds. Michael Brown is not Hulk Hogan, and Darren Wilson is not a 5-year-old boy. Real consequences, deadly consequences, current consequences. So returning to the realm of popular culture, I want to talk a little bit about Blade, okay? Not this Blade, this Blade. Now, let me be fair. Growing up, the pickings were slim for me. I grew up with Dolomite, in all those Dolomite films, Avenging Disco Godfather, Petey Wheatstraw, et cetera, et cetera. Meteor Man, and Blank Man, right? This is tough, but there's an important point to be made here before I move on. Returning to the white cultural imaginary, perhaps one of the most dangerous aspects of this imaginary of the Black masculine body is that for many Black men, it is seductive. It encourages us to become complicit in the reproduction of these ideas in our performances of masculinity, if for no other reason than the fact that these are the most familiar, most dominant ideas of Black men, that we are most consequential in our physical manifestation. But of course, this reaffirms the very fetish that is used to justify the destruction of our bodies and our lives. Our performance of this cultural imaginary is dangerous also because it severely limits the range of our capacity to engage others in our community and elsewhere with affection and emotional reciprocity. This may be most especially true in our relationships with Black women, as the performance of this type of Black masculinity requires the domination, the subjugation of Black women, even the menacing, as James Baldwin said, of Black women. So just as this performance of Black masculinity itself is an expression of the domination of the subjugation of Black men, as Black men take it on, as they are seduced by it, they think of themselves as powerful when they subjugate others in the Black community and express misogyny, misogynoir, express transphobia, homophobia, as an attempt to become more powerful within a hierarchy in which Black men ultimately will not be powerful. So listen, so if you think about it, Blank Man, Meteor Man, Dolomite, when Blade came out, I was all the way in because I had never seen anything like Blade. But Blade was problematic. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips to help make my argument and try to ruin the movie for you. Half joking. Okay. Let's do this, yeah. This is at the beginning of the film.
It's dislocated.
So, as I said at the beginning, I missed that because of my critical blindness. Blade is a superhero. Okay, and we're not going to get into the semantics of whether he's a superhero or not. Okay, he's a hero. What kind of hero throws a woman out of a window onto an adjacent building where she dislocates her shoulder and then he yanks her shoulder back into place? All right, well, let's look at another Blade clip here. All right, here's it. So later in the film, he encounters this young woman.
Give me your hand. Hola, amigo. Do you remember me?
Yes.
You can't see the clip.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry, everyone. 1 second. Come out here. Okay, give me 1 second, everyone. Sorry about this. What? Okay, that's what I think I need to do. Okay.
You took my arm, man. Remember?
This is what I want you all to see. Sorry about that there.
Why is Ford so interested in Lamagra?
Here we go. All right, how's that look here? Okay. So we have really quickly two images of Blade interacting with Black women in the film. In one image, he throws her out of the window. She dislocates her shoulder. He yanks it into place. I will spare everyone essentially a rape scene that happens later in the film. Then Blade fights a young woman and gives her a back fist across the face. Of course, later in the film, Blade fights his mother, played by Sanaa Lathan, and he kills her by driving a bone through her midsection. Blade shares dialogue with 3 Black women in the film, and he is profoundly violent toward all of them. And I missed all of that. And Blade's power quite literally comes at the expense of the 3 Black women with whom he shares dialogue. Some argue that Blade is an anti-hero and therefore he does not have the capacity for affection or tenderness, or perhaps he does in certain circumstances. Perhaps he does.
Feeling burning inside of me. I want to die while I'm still a vampire. I want to see the sun.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. So he goes outside, the sun. So look, it's just really interesting. So Karen Jensen, the hematologist that starred in Blade 1 and 2, we shouldn't even talk about Blade 3. Played by Bushy Wright, no affection, no sense of kindness, nothing, right? And so the question is, as Black men pursue power in these kinds of films, in this kind of representation of themselves as powerful, at least in the case with Blade, and of course there are obviously other examples, that power comes at the expense of others in the community, in the Black community in particular. So they reaffirm these hierarchies at the expense, in this instance, of Black women, I argue. And Michelle Wallace tells us that it's as though this kind of suffering for Black women at the expense of Black men is somehow subsidiary and derivative. As you know, and there's also this idea that this is Henry, who talks about this idea of Black men in power in film and in popular culture employing racial hierarchies to deny Black men power. In popular culture, these hierarchies deny Black men power while at the same time relying on traditional gender hierarchies to allow Black men power. So these ideas, these seductive ideas, have Black men expressing themselves as powerful at the expense of others in our own community. So I watched the Jeezy, Gucci. I mean, I missed it, but I did. I just wanted to click on some of it and just watch it. So I clicked on it. So let me just check it out. And so here we go. I want to play this little clip right here. Oops. I'm a dog, I'm a dog, I'm gonna treat her like a dog, feed her like a dog, beat her like a dog, and pass her to my dogs, right? Old images, old ideas, but not extinct ideas. Old ideas, but not extinct ideas, and no longer external ideas. So the potential squatter in the White House represents a potent example of the kind of hegemonic masculinity that we've been talking about tonight. The kind of hegemonic masculinity that apparently appealed to more Black men in the current election, or the most recent election, than 4 years ago, despite everything. And as Kamala Harris so eloquently put it, despite dog whistles through bullhorns. I can't help but wonder if it was Harris's presence on the ticket that drove some Black men away. One need only consider the responses of many Black men to Shirley Chisholm's candidacy years ago to imagine the likelihood that this is the case. Trump's MAGA personality and his masculinity, his MAGA masculinity, I should say, in all of its toxic hegemony, represents an embrace of dominance over strength, or perhaps strength as dominance, setting aside and discarding any notions of community or collective well-being or accountability. This may be best expressed by Lil Wayne, who said in a Nightline interview, well, I'll let him speak for himself, and some of you all probably know where this is going. What did Lil Wayne say?
My life matter, especially to my it is. Don't come at me with that dumb man. My life matter, especially to my
Do you separate yourself from it?
My life matters, especially to my B words. These expressions of toxic masculinity by Black men that pursue hegemonic notions of manhood as an ultimate goal, separate and distinct from any connection to community, tragically mirror the manhood of white patriarchal supremacy. Tragic not only because of the inherent harm of this toxic masculinity, but also because of the misguided notion that the privileges bestowed to white men will ever be fully bestowed to Black men. Ask Lil Pump, sorry. Ask Kanye. Far too many scholars, artists, activists have called for a different understanding of masculinity that does not require the dominance of others. For Black people, hegemonic notions of masculinity that are built on the idea that Black men are most powerful and dangerous in our physical form has never, ever served us. And more importantly, has never served our communities. As Patricia Hill Collins tells us, strength need not mean dominance. And the reverse is true. Dominance need not mean strength. Performances of masculinity that do harm to others in the Black community must no longer be tolerated. This is only part of the power of the Me Too movement and similar calls for accountability. Black men and women and Black members of the LGBTQIA community are not duty bound to suffer the indignity and violences, plural, of Black men performing and pantomiming and mimicking white hegemonic masculinity. This includes Black trans men as well. It is easier to identify the way in which Black men are misrepresented by others It is easy, to identify the way in which Black men are misrepresented by others. It is much more difficult and important to identify and excise the manner in which these ideas have become contagious in our own communities, to our own communities. This will require a number of strategies. Perhaps the most important is speaking and listening. People must speak the truth of their suffering. Others must listen, sitting quietly and listening. We must think new thoughts beyond the scripts written for us and find power and strength in our ability to serve the communities in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gayles. Again, if anyone has any questions and or comments, you can place them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I will be able to see them. I have one question to start off. That was a fascinating presentation. Thank you very much. What do you think, or how do you feel that this masculinity and fetishization of Black men is being portrayed today within the expansion of Marvel Comics being made into series and films?
Oh, so um, so I think that the maybe the most important point of reference is Black Panther, and I think in many ways the Black Panther is an ambitious film. You know, I still mourn the loss of Chadwick Boseman. The challenge for me with Black Panther is Killmonger, and to me, in many ways, Killmonger is essentially a black buck. He's a very familiar figure. And I wish that in a film as imaginative as the Black Panther is, that we did not have to invoke a character like Killmonger. And I know people are going to be upset with me. It's like, you know, in college, you didn't talk about Malcolm X and you didn't talk about Prince. And I think nowadays, you don't talk about the Black Panther. But I think, for example, earlier in the film, Killmonger unceremoniously kills a Black woman named Linda. And people don't remember that. People don't discuss it. And Linda is sacrificed as Killmonger makes his way to Wakanda. And I was stunned when that happened. And for me, it invoked some of what we discussed tonight, this idea of power coming at the expense of Black women. In that moment, was that necessary? Did you have to write her death into the film? But at the same time, when you think about the representation of the Dora Milaje and all these beautiful, strong Black women, I think we are moving in a direction of having a more expansive rendering of Black life that is promising. I'm waiting to watch Lovecraft on HBO. Everyone's telling me to watch it, so I'm waiting to watch it over the break so I can just binge and just watch it in one setting. When you think about, and this is Watchmen on HBO, which was brilliant and featured Regina Hall. You know, so there are extensions in, I think, the right direction. But of course, we really have to be vigilant and make sure that some of these old ideas don't creep in and become an anchor for what it is that we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what about the image of the giant Negro in the Green Mile?
Oh, the giant Negro, the magic Negro, you know, the self-sacrificing Negro. You know, the magic Negro is an old trope. It's been around forever. It's just old and it's tired and it's worn out. This idea of the Black character who really has no real purpose in the film except to usher the white protagonist to their ultimate victory. All right, and that certainly is the case with the Green Mile. There's a moment. If I'm not sure, I highly recommend this film. I think it's Netflix. The 40-year-old version, and it's about a woman who wants to start a hip hop career. She's frustrated with the racism in the theater scene, And there's a moment at the end of the film, at the end of the film, toward the end of the film, where they speak directly to the Magic Negro character, and it's brilliant. So I highly recommend it. It's a great film, but that's a great moment. So yeah, the giant black man, you know, for all of his power and all of his strength, all of that power and strength is in service to Tom Hanks' character. And we see that time and time again in film, where the black character, if the black character survives, it's because they survive in service to the white protagonist. And frequently the black character does not survive, as we know. And so certainly the Green Mile is an excellent example of the way in which the strength, I mean, think about the character in the Green Mile. He's a very imposing figure. I mean, he's a big person. How do you mitigate that threat? Well, you mitigate the threat by placing him in service to a character like Tom Hanks.
Okay. You also touch on the relationship between hip hop and the fetishization of Black men. Do you think that there are other ways in which hip hop culture actually deals with, well, you touch on Black hip hop and masculinity, hyper masculinity, but do you think there's ways in which hip hop culture actually continues to fall into this role of fetishization of Black men as well?
You know, absolutely. So I think about something that Talib Kweli said in Byron Hurt's Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, and that film, that documentary, is brilliant as it is, it's probably 20 years old now. But Talib Kweli makes this distinction between radio hip hop and like underground hip hop or authentic hip hop. And I think in radio hip hop, you know, there are some challenges, you know, and to be quite frank, I don't listen to a lot of it because I find so much of it redundant and formulaic and predictable. And in the sense that there are certain ideas that are going to be repeated. My ability to do harm to other Black men, my ability to do harm to women, my ability to effect symbolic harm by having so much money that I can do X, Y, and Z. My ability to distinguish myself from the LGBTQIA community and to render someone weaker by asserting that they are a member of that community. And so these are all the same sort of ideas. And I think that we really have to think about the ways in which, you know, as I was saying, I read Luke Cage growing up and I missed all of that, but those ideas were somewhere in the back of my head, you know, marinating and influencing how I thought about myself. And so, you know, I think we have to be very vigilant about the ways in which certain ideas become normalized. I mean, I'd never heard that Gucci song. I'm not sure if I'm saying this. Do you have to say the whole name? You know what I mean? Like Gucci Mane, you have to say the whole, I don't know. I don't care.
Okay.
But okay. All right. So, I mean, but just to think about, you know, being in this verses and just to say that, beat her like a dog, walk her like a dog, so on and so forth. And it's not as if he's looking over his shoulder to think if he's going to offend anyone or get anyone in trouble. And so there's a certain, not a certain degree, it's normalized. And somewhere, somehow, that's a problem. You know, I think we saw that in the response to Megan Thee Stallion's shooting, where it was funny to some people. And well, that comes from somewhere, and it represents broader ideas about Black women that Black men perpetrate.
Yeah, and I think we can see some of that fetishization as well with the images of hip hop, the images that they portray. So similar to what you started off talking about, the man in the polyester suit, right? And so these images of these virulent, strong men, and I'm thinking more so of 50 Cent and his image, or LL Cool J, and this focus on the Black masculine body. Another question are, what are your thoughts on the selection of Michael B. Jordan as people's sexiest man as relates to the worshiping while subtle fear of the Black male?
Oh, wow. I need to renew my subscription to People magazine. I did know. So I think that's an interesting question. You know, I want to say that, hey, okay, you know, that's cool, you know, Black guy, blah, blah, blah. But I really do think that there's a space where valued in that way, so is it, yeah, is it the most handsome or most beautiful? What is I'm interested in the language that's used. And so to think about, if that language is broader, and so we're recognizing perhaps Michael B. Jordan as a human being that is beautiful, what have you, instead of a male, a body, then I think that's promising. I think, we have to be careful about, again, rendering Black men as being most in an essence where they are best understood, best appreciated as bodies being flexed, bodies in action, bodies, kinetic bodies, instead of human beings. So that still, on a certain level makes me nervous, but perhaps that's a step forward. Not the best answer, but that's the best I can do.
Well, they didn't refer to him as the world's most beautiful man. They said sexiest, which also has its own connotations.
Right.
With the whole idea of this fetishization of the Black male body, right? And I think the person that was asking the question was talking about, what you said about Michael B. Jordan in the role as Killmonger, and how he rose to popularity kind of after that among some, and to even appear on People's Magazine.
Right, this is true. Right, good point.
So do you think the representation of Black masculinity in popular culture is ever going to change, or is it changing?
I think it's changing. So I'm not one. Sometimes some of us in Black studies, Africana studies, we don't want to acknowledge progress for fear of being misunderstood as saying everything is great. I think we have made progress. I mean, these are old ideas. These ideas go back to the first anthropological accounts of encounters with black people on the continent of Africa. So these are old ideas. And, if we think about the history of popular culture, of comic books and television, we're not, there's still, relatively speaking, a very new technology. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. It's not going to be an immediate shift. But here's the thing, though, to the extent that white corporate interests control these channels, there will always be this rendering that serves those that are driving profits. And so the value of Black life, affirming Black life, is not profitable. It has never been profitable in the United States, especially in popular culture. We joke sometimes around a reality TV show around Black academics and how boring it would be, because who would want to, I wouldn't, I mean, it's not exotic, and it's, no one's shooting anybody or killing anybody, and there are faculty meetings and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. That's not going to get someone somewhere 45 minutes outside the perimeter of Atlanta to watch a show. That's not what they're interested in seeing. And so we need to do more to control our own channels. And not only that, because it's not just that. I've attended a number of Black comic book conventions in working on the documentary. And what I saw in those Black spaces, and this will make sense to many of us here, is the same kind of patterns. And so there will be all of these panels, right? And then there will be a panel on the representation of Black women in comic books. And you go to the panel and there are very, very few people there. And all the people there, if there are people there, are Black women. And so there's this, within this space, which affirms Black life, there are these hierarchies. And so it's not as if, it's not just race, Kimberly Crenshaw, it's intersectional. And so we have to be vigilant and persistent and disruptive and ask that question, what about us? What about this group? What about that group? But ultimately, as long as these corporate interests influence these channels, it's going to be difficult for us to see change.
Unmute, Lakeith. Unmute.
Sorry, thank you. So I said I was going to read this one verbatim. I didn't realize I was muted. Technology. So powerful presentation. As the mother of a teenage son, what are your thoughts around how do I teach my son to embrace and honor his Black masculine body while challenging archaic homogenic notions about Black masculinity? And then how do I help to cultivate his sense of a self in a world where media and people do respect him as a whole human being?
Oh my goodness.
So
Jeez.
how does he teach her son to embrace his Black masculinity while challenging archaic homogenic notions about Black masculinity, and then helping him to develop and cultivate his sense of self in a world where he's not respected?
Okay. So, I don't have a son. I have a father-son relationship with a young man that now lives in Tampa, and he's married and has kids. And we've had these conversations, but it's been some time since we've talked about those kinds of things. But I want to answer the question as a father to two daughters, and also as a son to two parents that were very, very vigilant. And I think, what I hear myself say is we have to get on our kids' nerves. We can't let them watch or listen to anything without stepping in and saying, okay, did you hear that? Did you see that? What do you think that means? Why do you think that is? We have to have those conversations because the purpose of those kinds of representations is to prevent, the implication is that you shouldn't have those conversations. We're going to have the conversations for you. The film that I hate the most is Frozen, because I'm a father to two daughters. And just the power of those images and the long hair and Elsa and Anna. And I beat that film over the head every chance I get. And, my daughters are sick of me. But I'm giving them a vocabulary to about these things. I want them to have the given to them by people outside of their own home, people that are not concerned about their emotional well-being as Black women. And so I would say to the person that posed that question, you have to be vigilant, you have to be obstinate, and you have to help give your son a vocabulary to think about these things. And it's difficult as parents because, our kids know everything until they get older and they realize that they wish they had listened. Certainly that's the case with me. But I really do think we have to be steadfast because these media images are steadfast. Soot Jolly once said that, essentially media is such now that you cannot operate outside of media. To operate outside of media now is to operate outside of culture. And so then our role has to be to constantly insert ourselves, to say, what does it mean for that person to say that? What does it mean for us to see these images all of the time in this way? Why are you listening to that? Okay, you can listen to it, but let's talk about why you find it or why you aren't offended by that. We have to be vigilant. I was looking for some sun hats for my daughters, and they have these hats with blonde ponytails tied to the hat. What in the world, And so if we aren't careful, the vocabulary is provided for our kids. And our role is we have to do everything that we can. We have to be vigilant. We have to do everything that we can. We have to be in touch with what they're seeing and reading and listening to, et cetera. We have to be in touch with it and invite conversations. And if we're not inviting the conversation, we have to force the conversation because quite honestly, the stakes are too high. I have a friend, we're on a group text, and just about the power of language and just ideas. And he relayed to us that he has a son in college. and he sent his son a text, and excuse my language, but he sent his son a text and said, well, when you join a particular group, you're going to be running all those hoes. Right? Now, this is someone that I know well. This is someone that will soon have a college-age daughter, right? So even in spaces, my social spaces, that is an idea that comes from somewhere, right? And as my friend has that vocabulary, that kind of language, and shares it with us, that idea is going to potentially cause harm to his own daughter. So we have to be vigilant. Now, I will be honest and say I didn't correct my friend because we have a long-standing battle about this, and it would not have made a difference. And I felt like he was trying to trigger me. But I think that's an example about how these ideas persist, and they just kind of happen. This kind of language, it just happens, and we have to listen and step in and say, no, wait a minute. No, what was that you were just watching? We have to. And what else can we do?
I have a question for you, based on what you said during your talk about your parents were vigilant and they were definitely helping you. And this probably is a parent-to-parent question, because I know we try to be vigilant in this household. But also listening to Barack Obama last night during his interview where he said that he did not become more conscientious until later in life, maybe later in high school. I think he says much later, because the guy referenced 10th grade. He was like, no, much later than that, right? And so people think that you always have this persistent trajectory of how you're going to be. But do you think that young people or your kids, let's say your kids, for instance, are hearing what you say, but may not have the tools to evaluate it?
They may not have the tools. So my daughters are 8 and 10, as you know. So they might not have the tools to do some kind of analysis, but they can point it out. So they will say to me proactively, if I'm walking and they're watching something, they'll say, there's a black girl in it, Daddy. Because I'm going to ask them, where's the little black girl?
Yes. Oh, same thing. We go into the store and one of my kids will say, hey, I want this doll.
Yeah.
That has a white girl on it. You know how mommy feels about that. Yeah. So yeah,
I think so. And so as they get older, their questions will become, more critical, because they will. I mean, they see the patterns now. They see the patterns now because their mother and I are always pointing out the patterns. So their vocabulary, they might not have the vocabulary, but by the time they get in high school, it's my hope that they're not going to be tolerant, right? So they will see it. Not only that, they'll see it, but also I don't want them to be tolerant of it. And I want them to ask questions about why and how and that kind of thing. So yeah, it takes some time, I think.
Okay. Do you think the representation of Black superheroes, especially Black Panther, is part of the underlying rise in the expression of racism, aka the rise of MAGA, because white people really do fear the strength of Black men?
So, I think that's certainly a possibility. I felt that way when I watched Blade for the first time. I was looking around my shoulder like, okay, y'all, is everybody okay with this? I think to be a white heterosexual man in the United States means that you've been taught from the moment that you're born that the world belongs to you. Even if it doesn't, symbolically it belongs to you, right? And so you have 8 years of the Obamas in the White House. They had the nerve to even get a black dog, right? And then you have a movie like the Black Panther that, at the time when it came out, was the #1 grossing film of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes on the heels of they had Stringer Bell and Thor. So people were upset because Idris Elba was in Thor playing Heimdall, and white supremacists literally were organizing protests because they were like, well, can we just have an all-white Thor movie? Like, no, we're gonna put Stringer in Thor, you know, Stringer gonna be in Thor, you know what I mean? So I think there is this sense of losing, even if it really isn't true, right? Losing these ongoing points of reference of one's own symbolic power. And so if now you have a Black woman as VP, a heartbeat away from the White House, and you have these you know, this prominence of Black and brown voters and speaking out, for some people it's completely intolerable. It is really about their worldview being challenged. And you know, it's a very, I can imagine it's a very difficult thing for them. But like Dave Chappelle said, I don't care.
Yes. So do you have any recommendations on media sources for consumption, I guess, for young people or for anyone in general? Books, magazines, TV shows, social, etc.
Right. So for me, so I'm biased, you know, with my daughters. I'm trying to get them into comic books. So there's a great comic book series called Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, and it features a young Black woman named Lunella, who is, I think she's either the third, someone's going to correct me, the third or fourth smartest person in the entire Marvel universe, right? And it's a powerful, powerful thing to have your daughters read about a young girl who's a scientist and her superpower is her intelligence, really. So I would highly, highly recommend that for young people, for all young people, not just for little girls. I am behind, but I think what is being done with the Black Panther and the Dora Milaje and the World of Wakanda, they're breaking ground, very important ground around race, around ideas of nationality, around ideas of diaspora, around ideas of sexuality in the diaspora. Fascinating, fascinating work being done. So I would recommend those two texts.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on Miles Morales as Spider-Man?
Oh, Beyond the Spider-Verse. Brilliant film. I enjoyed it a great deal. You know, we really don't have time, but we could talk a little bit about his uncle and, you know, this opposition again between, you know, the good cop and the, you know, sort of street guy, so on and so forth. But what I found interesting was that his uncle was killed by the main antagonist before his uncle could do any real harm. And there's this affection that he shares with Miles. There's a sense of loss that Miles' father feels toward his brother. So there's this affection between Black men that you very rarely see in film. And I was looking at, I can't afford the new PlayStation, but I was looking at a trailer, the video game, the Miles Morales video game, and it looks brilliant in terms of their engagement of Black Lives Matter, police violence, and sort of the tension around his uncle. So I love it. I haven't read the comic book, but I thought Beyond the Spider-Verse was great, and I can't wait for the sequel.
Okay, and the final question that I have is, what is the role of men's groups for building transformative masculinity?
Right. Oh, it's a great question. So it depends on the group. Right. So I can remember sitting on one of these Black men endangered, you know, panels at Morehouse years and years ago, maybe 12 years ago, 13, 14 perhaps. It was one of these panels where they had too many people on the panel. And by the time everyone introduced themselves, the damn thing was halfway over. But I was on the panel with Kevin Powell, and we all said our piece. And then it was Q&A, and this man got up and he introduced himself and he talked about, you know, that he represents a rites of passage program, and we believe that men have to raise men, and so on and so forth. The audience were primarily African-American high school students. And we believe men have to raise men. And he did a little, never really asked the question. You know how that goes. And there was one microphone for like 8 people. And Kevin was, come on, give me the microphone. Got the microphone. And he said, okay, I was raised by my mother. So what does that mean for me? And then Kevin said, how many of you are being raised by your mother right now? 3/4 of the audience raised their hand. And Kevin, I mean, he just made it plain. So you think about that man and the group that he was running, the rites of passage, and what is he teaching them? And how are those young men going to go out and interact in the world? It depends on the group. I was a part of a group some years ago in Atlanta that was doing some really promising work around disrupting these ideas. I am fortunate to be a part of a group of friends that I've known for 30 years, and we do a lot of disruption around these traditional ideas around masculinity, most of us. And so I think it really does depend on the group. I think there's danger in thinking that you get a group of Black men together and immediately something good is going to happen. I think it depends on the man. It's the same thing as the idea of, the suggestion that a home is broken if a man isn't present. Well, depends on the man, because sometimes the home is broken because the man is present. And so I think we have to really move away from these assumptions. I mean, because really, I think part of what's built into that is the idea that men should be in charge. And this is not what the questioner is suggesting, but I think for others, if Black men could just get it together, then the Black community will be all right. So let's wait on them to get it together. No, we can't do that anymore. Time out for that, right? We all have to work together. And so I think there's a lot of literature around these Black male groups and the kinds of dangers that are inherent in having that kind of isolated space. I'm not sure that I disagree, but I do think depending on the group, I mean, you think about a group like Men Stopping Violence here in the city of Atlanta, well, you have the right men involved in doing the right kind of work. So I think it really does depend.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Gayles. This was a very insightful and engaging conversation. Again, our last Freedom Schools talk for this semester will occur on December the 4th, and it is a different time. It will occur at 12 noon, and it will feature Dr. Maurice Hobson, who will discuss the Red Dog Police Force here in Atlanta. Once again, we're going to thank the Department of Africana Studies, as well as Arvin Avenue Research Library for working with us on bringing you this Freedom School series. Dr. Gayles, do you have any further comments?
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Lakita, for all of your hard work and sacrificing all of these Friday nights. I hope everyone, these are dangerous times, be safe, be aware, be vigilant. And I also want to thank Arvin Avenue for all of their hard work and Priscilla's hard work in filling up the chat with all of these incredible resources. And of course, Morris Gardner, who does phenomenal work with us and, in the, Atlanta community as well. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.